Have the CEO of Asher Standard and a very good friend of mine, Mr. David Stelzer, and he's going to be talking about how to optimize your garden soil, the plant pyramid, and give you some really practical steps. Please welcome to the stage David Stelzer.
Well, good morning. Hey, I think I'm gonna move just a little bit different direction. You heard a lot about what's going on in the interrelationship with the government and farms and how that works. Today I'm gonna move directions, and I've had my share of that too. In fact. Got a book coming out pretty soon that's actually going to talk a bunch about my experience in that realm. But what we really need to be looking at today is what can we do to change the health of our family now and today. That's the bottom line. Do we want to have a healthy family? And and I'll just very, very quickly. My story starts, I was the sickly kid, so sick that I was not expected to live as a child. And my parents did not want to accept that, and they chose to change our diets, change the diet of the entire family actually, and make major changes in the way that we lived our life, including moving our farm to organic regenerative agriculture before it was even cool back in the early 70s. So, and not only did it change my life, I got completely well, but my grandfather was living with us, also regained his health at the same time and made us believers. We became believers in healthy food from healthy soil and how it makes a difference. And so, as organic farmers now, that was, how we had to learn how to connect with people that care about the food that they eat, with farmers who care about the food that they grow. So that's how Asher Standard was born. I'm not going to talk about that too much, but this is what we've been doing over the course of the last 40 years or so in our journey to organic and regenerative agriculture. One step at a time, let's get better and better food. But I want to give you a little bit of the why first. And it's for our families. I was that sickly kid. My wife and I raised 11 children. We did not have to rinse and repeat. It was not the same. We were both grew up super unhealthy until we changed our diet. Our children, it was exact opposite. And no, they didn't get any vaccines or anything like that. But I think you just heard about that. But none of them ever got ill enough or even hurt enough, except for one broken femur, to ever even see a doctor. 11 kids for 18 years. How many can do that? So it's about our families. It's about changing the trajectory of our family tree. And we can absolutely do that. And it starts in the soil, in the garden. It starts exactly there. So I want to talk just a little bit about plants and plant health. So, and how that relates to our bodies and our lives. So plants are a miracle thing. they do this thing called photosynthesis, right? They create energy, i.e. in the forms of sugar typically, from sunlight and water. That's the miracle of life. All energy on all of Earth actually comes from plants originally. That's the amazing and beautiful thing about plants. And if we're eating the plants, or we're eating the animals that ate the plants, or even the animals that ate the animals that ate the plants, still, it all comes back to that process, that photosynthetic process that happens when we have a plant in healthy soil. So there's two things with the plant health side, and this is something that I've learned over, nearly 50 years of organic farming. We farm, currently about 5,000 acres of organic agriculture. Back when we started, it was about 500. But this is the key to organic agriculture. Oftentimes organic agriculture is, and this is super important. Organic is about what's not in the food. No glyphosates, no, anhydrous ammonia, no Agent Orange. Full spectrum broadleaf. Same thing, but organic tells you what's not in your food. But really, that's super important. But even more is what is in your food. Does it have all the life-giving qualities that we need for optimum health? The average conventional farmer actually puts on 3 nutrients, M, P, and K, on any fertilizer bag. Have you ever seen much more than that? It's not there. How many nutrients do we need for optimum health? 72, maybe more. Had a doctor tell me that that's a lowball figure. 72 nutrients for optimum health. How does the plant get that from 3? It doesn't. It doesn't get it from 3 because number one is nitrogen is a growth regulator, and the standard conventional fertilizer, that is a synthetic. It's not real. The microbes in the soil is what is supposed to create the nutrients for the plant. That includes the nitrogen. Nitrogen is one of the hardest things for the microbes to create. So basically, and I think God made it that way because it does not want the plant to grow bigger than all of the rest of the nutrients that it has. That's the lowest common denominator, and nitrogen's the growth regulator, so it concentrates the plant into a lower yield if it doesn't have enough nutrients to finish. You synthesize the nitrogen, you make the plant grow bigger, you're diluting all the rest of the nutrients because all the rest of the nutrients have to be created by the microbes because the farmer's only putting on 3 and the N is synthetic. It's not real. It's a synthesized nitrogen. It's not real. It just makes the plant think it has nitrogen that it really doesn't have. Okay, but the plant grows bigger. And because a farmer is only paid on how many tons he raises, that's the go-to. All right. Now, they say it can't be done. You can't do organic. You can't do completely, the bugs will come in and eat it up. It won't survive. You can't survive as a farmer. I want to tell you that's not true. 100% is not true. In a plant, I guess, so there's 4 substances. All originally comes from the sugars. Bottom line, photosynthesis creates sugar from water and sunlight. But in order to do that, that plant has to have a certain level of health. That health comes from the microbes in the soil. Microbes, remember, they cannot produce energy on their own. They are not photosynthetic. They have to get their energy from the plant. And that can be from the plant the residue from the previous crop or the previous whatever grew there, the leaves that fall in the forest or whatever, and the microbes eat that. That's energy source for the microbes. But even more importantly is a healthy plant uses its sugar in roughly four ways. It splits its sugar equally between producing cellulose, that's the plant itself, the root system of the plant, which is also cellulose with a little bit more to it, and the reproduction, that's the seed or the fruit, and then a quarter of the sugar that plant produces is exuded into the soil to feed the microbes. And that just happens naturally in healthy plants. If the microbes are giving it all the right nutrients, sugars come in many, many forms. There are a whole bunch of different saccharides, right? Now, if the plant is healthy, the healthier the plant is, I should say, the more complex sugar that plant actually produces. It's called a polysaccharide or a complex polysaccharide. Those are sugars that are bound tightly with a wide variety of sugars, or different kinds of saccharides. Our bodies are absolutely built to use polysaccharides. If we feed our bodies a simple sugar, i.e. something like high fructose corn syrup, that's pure fructose, by the way, a single saccharide, a monosaccharide, that instantly hits our blood sugar, goes to our body, creates a rush, and instantly crashes, stresses our liver, and eventually creates things like sugar diabetes and hyperglycemia and their twin autoimmune disorders that take place from that up and down in the sugar content. When we eat fresh, real food that has a complex polysaccharide, our body has to digest that with the microbes that are in our microbiome, and it releases energy to us slowly over time. Okay? So we don't have to, in fact, if we don't eat for a few days, we can survive that. We don't crash, we don't have blood sugar crashes and spikes. Our body slowly releases that, and if we run out, then our body begins to use our fat reserves to convert to sugars to give us energy, right? They call that burning fat. Well, we don't burn fat, we're burning the conversion that the body makes. So the interesting part about that is when we're growing these plants in our garden, there is a host, or in our fields, there is a host of insects, and I think God made this way too. The insects come in, especially the sap-sucking insects like aphids and whitefly and all those nasty ones like that eat on the sap of the plant. They can only digest simple sugars. So when the plant is not healthy, it begins to produce a more simple sugar, a monosaccharide or bisaccharide. And those are the only ones that those insects can digest. So when you're using something like anhydrous ammonia or these chemical fertilizers that are synthesizers, the plant cannot absolutely convert to complex sugars because it's pushed way beyond its means. So it's creating simple sugars in the plant. So the insects come in to devour that plant because it's not fit for food for you or for animals of any sort for that matter. So naturally, God sends in the insects to destroy that plant so it doesn't reproduce and so that we don't eat it. And of course, we go in and spray it with insecticides to kill the insects to make sure we do get to eat food that's not fit to eat. But the cool part is when our sugar content is correct, then we don't actually even have to worry about insecticides because they'll never, the plants don't get those insects. And I've actually done that experiment in our own fields. We had a patch of kale in our one of our experimental fields, and it was a long row and it was beautiful kale. And so we went in and we took like 3 plants randomly in the middle of the row, and we went in with a knife and we cut all the main roots to that kale plant to stress the plant. Now it's not getting all the microbes, it's not getting all the nutrients from the microbes. It was less than 5 days later, and those kale plants were absolutely covered with aphids. Kale's kind of susceptible to aphid anyway. They like brassicas. It was covered with aphids, and those plants were just wilting with aphids. The ones right next to them that the roots hadn't been touched didn't have an aphid on them. That's absolutely, it's all about the health of that plant. Now, as we move forward, the next thing that the plant creates, and this is super important to our health, is the proteins, right? The plant begins to convert the amino acids to protein chains, right? And it uses the energy that it gets from sugar to do that very thing. It's creating the protein content of the plant. Now, almost exactly the same thing is true with proteins as is true with sugars, only it's a little bit more important to our health. I mean, sugars, yes, it goes up and down and up and down, but the proteins are the building blocks of muscles and all that. And I want to tell you just a quick story about wheat. You know, right now, wheat has been a little bit villainized. Oh, come on. I'm wheat intolerant, can't eat wheat. You know what? Wheat has been the foundation of civilization. Civilizations were built on wheat. We couldn't even build cities until we learned how to grow wheat. Wheat has been, because not only is it a very healthy food, but it's pretty high in protein. You know what? Wheat's about 12 to 14% protein. Well, okay. Well, I mean, compare that with, peas or something, 22%. Or, soybeans, which is the highest of the plant, 32%. So you're almost halfway to the highest with wheat, and you can eat a lot more wheat than you would soybeans. And I'm not trying to compare wheat and soybeans. Soybeans, they have their place in fermented foods and stuff, but I would not suggest eating high quantities of soybeans. Now, wheat, back in the day, before the Green Revolution took place, then nobody was allergic to wheat. That didn't even exist. Celiac disease didn't exist. And everybody ate wheat, almost. I mean, of course, sourdough and all of those things. I mean, we didn't have baker's yeast and all those things. So, I mean, I think this resurgence of sourdough is just awesome. I mean, we've been doing sourdough for like 30 years, but this is beautiful because it is the right thing. But when we push wheat again with the chemical fertilizer, the only amino acid that wheat can actually make from the synthetic anhydrous, the ammonia type fertilizers, can be aqua ammonia and whatever the form, but they're ammonia based fertilizers. It's the synthetic nitrogen. The only one is L-glutamine. You know what? L-glutamine now has to make up the majority of the protein. Now, you can't get wheat quality. The quality has to stay. In order to bake good bread, the total protein quantity can't go down. And the wheat can't create the other amino acids. So what does it do? It creates more L-glutamine. You put more nitrogen on, you keep putting more, and it produces more and more of that one amino acid. And guess what? Our bodies can't build muscles out of one amino acid. It takes at least 12 to make muscle. So we eat wheat, and we get more and more and more of one amino acid, and our bodies then have to try to find the rest of the amino acids somewhere else. Even if we're eating a lot of meat that's a little bit more balanced in amino acids, guess what? Those cows have been eating corn, soy, all the same stuff pushed by the same ammonia fertilizer is what your wheat was pushed with. So we become more and more deficient in the amino acid chain to be able to build our healthy bodies. The cool part is that when you get back to real grain, organically produced ancient grains before the Green Revolution ideally, but even modern grains raised in healthy organic soil are way, way more balanced than if they're pushed with anhydrous ammonia. That's the beauty of that. And as a side note, the amino acids, the next level of insects, i.e. the ones that chew and bite and eat the plants, they go for the proteins. And beautifully enough, they have to have simple amino acid chains. They absolutely love the single amino acid chain of things like the wheat. So of course we have to go on and use insecticide to kill those guys because they're coming in to destroy the crops that are not fit for human food. And guess what? We can change the makeup of our protein if we eat those ancient grains. I was actually just talking to a naturopath. I actually gave a little talk similar to this at a naturopathic convention, not similar to this, but just on the health side, at a naturopathic convention, and a Dr. Zeff, he's one of the leaders in naturopathic world. He came up to me about a few months later and he said, I just started prescribing all my patients that I would normally tell to go wheat free to go to an ancient grain, organic ancient grain diet for their grains. And he said, I get twice as good a results as going wheat free. Why? Because you're getting true amino acids and you're not getting that unbalance that we're talking about there. And then we move, and then we move on to fats. And I don't really have time to go into the fats as strongly as these last two, but I will tell you that that's the next level that a plant begins to produce. It's its fats and oils. So also the sugar that photosynthetic action makes, there's the engine inside of your plant to create healthy fats. And I will tell you a little bit, there's a lot of controversy about fats and oils right now. And I just want to give you a tiny little pitch about fats and oils. If the fat is coming from healthy plants, it's healthy fat. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm saying that all vegetable oil is good for you, because that's incorrect. Most of it's, first of all, not coming from healthy plants. And in the second place, most of that is extracted with a substance called methyl hydroxide. But methyl hydroxide is very damaging to our health. So if you're eating oils or fats that are plant-based, and that doesn't count if you're using like tallows and fats from animals, but tallows and fats from animals, remember, come from the animals, and toxins are stored in the fat. So make sure you know where that animal's coming from. I hope you raised it on your homestead if you're going to eat the fats and tallows from that animal. However, going back to the plants, if we're eating healthy fats, if the plant is raised correctly and we have healthy fats and it's not cut with methyl hydroxide or used, and that's the crazy thing. You just make blanket statements like all seed oils are bad. Yeah, a lot of them are cut with methyl hydroxide. They're bad. But not all plants. I mean, a sunflower, you can squeeze the oil between your fingers. It comes out easily. You do not have to necessarily use methyl hydroxide. And organic oils are not allowed to use methyl hydroxide at all. And then the fad says, hey, you can't do that. Use avocado oil. And now guess what? In order to get more oil out of avocados, they're using methyl hydroxide to extract avocado oil, unless it's certified organic. So that's, and that's kind of the way it works, is when things get out of balance, blanket statements. We want to eat our food as close to the way God made it as we possibly can for optimum health, and we want to grow plants the way God intended, from the microbes giving the nutrients to the plants, not from synthetics. And we can feed our soil, absolutely feed our soil proteins, things like that. I always tell, if you're just doing gardening, if you're a farmer, you know about soil tests, you know about, tissue samples, you know about all of those things, and learn as much as you possibly can about those things. If you're a gardener, use compost that you know where it comes from. But one of the things I would say, add more protein to feed the microbes. Things like liquid fish and kelp are really awesome, and you can't really overdo it, and you can't really mess it up real bad. But the fats, very similar. The way the lipids are made up, the more difficult insects cannot eat simple lipids. Can only eat simple lipids. And these are the ones that actually, the borers and the rootworms and the cutworms and all these ones that are a little bit more difficult. And then we get to the very top of the what I call the plant health pyramid, and that's where the essential oils come in. And essential oils, those cover, and that's basically the medicine of the plant. You hear food is your medicine, medicine is your medicine should be your food. That's where the essential oils come in. Essential oils can be beautiful medicine, but best if gotten from our food. And healthy plants produce the right essential oils, especially when you're dealing with your fruits and your vegetables and those kinds of things. So I just want to encourage each one that's gardening. Remember, you're feeding your microbes, you're not feeding your plants. We're feeding the microbes, we're giving them a good place to live, we're giving them food. If you have really poor soil, you can mix a little molasses with your liquid fish, little trick that you can do to increase the microbe content really fast. Fish is really quick. You get a quick burst of microbes and a fairly quick die-off. Again, these are ways that you can do that quickly. Obviously, we want nutrient-rich soil in the long run. We want the best of the best. So it's not hard necessarily. You just have to pay attention to what you're doing. It's not hard to grow organic, regenerative food. And if farmers tell you that it's too hard and it can't be done, it's because they either don't want to, because they want to take an easy button. It takes more work. It takes more labor. It's more testing, all those things. Or they just don't know how yet. It's not impossible. It's not too hard, nor is it impossible in our own gardens. And what we've done, here at my life's mission has been to connect the farmers that really, really care about with the food that is the very best that you can possibly get, and that is our Azure mission. So if any of you are not familiar with Azure Standard, it's azurestandard.com. I thought I had a slide for that, but maybe it's right on the bottom here. We would love to work with you as a consumer or as a farmer. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Thank you, John.
Thank you, David. So next up, we have a husband-wife team. The nice thing about the speakers here is that people are actual practitioners, and they created what is called the one cow revolution. Not a herd, you just have one cow, and they do that on no or low inputs. So please welcome to the stage Sean and Beth Doherty.
Good morning. What a great conference. So well organized. It's really, we're very excited to be here. A very brief introduction. We are actually from Toronto, Ohio.
Hopefully it was okay.
We are only 2 hours from here, a little bit east and south. And why are we on this stage? Because we grow about everything we eat, and we grow everything our animals eat from the farm. So it's a different perspective than what a lot of people encounter. We don't go to the grocery store, we don't go to the feed store.
So I think we're here today to talk about something we don't have yet. Why'd we come? I don't think anybody in this tent is satisfied with the conventional food production system. We're not satisfied with how it's done and what it's bringing to our tables. We're looking for something better. Better food, maybe a better life for our families. This isn't something that we can find at the store. The quality of food we're going to talk about today is not for sale virtually anywhere unless you go onto the farm. And unfortunately, if you could find it, chances are you're going to go home saying, I can't afford to buy that food.
But when a time of toxic food, life is expensive, human problems are rampant, we could be very depressed, and we're not. We're very, very hopeful about the future because God made an orderly world that works. He made it to be a good home for us, and He made us to take care of it. Not on the scale of thousands of acres and big machines and toxic chemicals, but on the family scale, on the scale of a few acres. And it is amazing what you can do on just a few acres. And how do we know? Because for many years, we've watched our own homestead become a place of abundance without inputs, building soil, building fertility, providing our family with the best food that there is in abundance, and our animals with a huge abundance of forage and food, and our whole farm with a natural health. God planned nature to be a place of order and abundance. And when families learn how to work and manage His creation according to His plan, this is what can happen.
So that's what we're here to talk about today, God's plan for how families can produce their own needs on a small acreage. What does that look like? It looks like working with your family. This is going to call out the good and the service in everybody in your family, everybody on the homestead. This means we're going to be able to develop places that we can call home forever. We're not going to have to jack up and leave because times get hard, because our homesteads are capable of supporting all the life on them, plant, animal, and human. It means we're going to be able to grow most or all of our food. That's not that hard. And not just our food, but our animals' food and our soil's food.
Might look like. And people were getting out of farming in droves. We were watching that. That's what our parents did. They all left the farm. Farming was supposed to be obsolete, but we believed that God's plan for human beings was a family plan and a country plan. And all over about 20 years, we learned a pattern, God's pattern. for how a small farm can be managed for the most fertile soil, the most nutritious plants, the healthiest animals, and the best food. So this is our story. In 1996, we bought the worst land in Ohio. It was trees upside of a hill. It was one place that was flat, about the size of a swimming pool, and a house that was barely standing up. But it's what we could get our hands on. And it was better than staying in the city. So we thought, okay, we'll get this and we'll flip it. We stayed there for a while, and within 2 years or so, we were beginning to grow our food because we couldn't stop. We knew we always wanted to farm, and even with junk land, we were going to do some farming. We had goats, we had meat, we had milk, chickens and eggs, all sorts of vegetables, and it was all delicious.
But there was a hitch, which was we were bringing in a lot of food, a lot of animal feed, and a lot of compost. All those nutrients that are starting to grow food for us on this little trashy piece of land were coming from off farm. And you know, you guys today who are starting a garden must be asking the same set of questions like, do I really know what's in this compost? Do I really know where it came from or what these plants may have been sprayed with? Do I really know what's in my organic animal feed? Rip the label off that bag and read it. You know, 45 ingredients and only 5 of them sound like something an animal might eat. So we had all this stuff coming from off farm, and even though our farm was feeding us, we were not content. 1, it cost a lot of money. 2, we didn't really know what quality we're getting still. So after a while, we're keeping goats. The goats wipe out all the briars. That's why we had goats, because we had an enormous booming crop of blackberry cane. And as we kept the goats and they ate the briars, lo and behold, grass grew in after them. And so we began asking ourselves, you know, like, now we have grass, should we get a dairy cow? We were very intimidated. We had milked goats for a number of years, but for some reason, when you go from goat, little, to cow, you feel like there's a huge substantive difference. So we were nervous. 1, we were nervous about the commitment. For some reason, people think if you don't milk a dairy cow at exactly the same time every day, it will roll over and die. So we were scared of that. It's big, right? And for some reason, if you've ever met a cow and a goat, you will know this is not true. But for some reason, you have the feeling that cows are scary and goats aren't. So we were worried about that. We were worried legitimately whether our land was good enough for a cow. And then we had the dumbest fear of all, which was, it will be too much milk.
But with our goat food now gone, because the goats have a tendency to eat their stuff and then it not come back, which was wonderful, we now had a lot of cow food. So we've moved from briars to grass. Grass was now coming in. So we got Isabel anyways. It was a crazy couple of weeks, but things began to look up for us as we figured out how to milk her. And now we were drowning in milk. 2 or 3 gallons of drinking milk per day. I was in heaven.
We do have 8 children, and 6 of them are boys.
That's right. We had fresh butter. We had homemade cheeses. We had sour cream. We had cheesecake galore. Now we are producing even more of our food from this dairy cow, in addition to the vegetables and the eggs and the chickens and the goat meat. I was really glad to see the goat go.
The ultimate revenge, you eat the animal you don't like.
Right. But we had all the dairy products we could dream of in limitless quantities. It comes in every day, sometimes twice a day, plus beef from Isabel's calves. How can it get better than that? But things still weren't quite right. We were buying more feed than ever, and we were very concerned about the questionable nutrients and what was in that feed. Not only that, we could see that our pastures were thin and bare. there's a problem. Our search for the best food was still not getting us where we wanted to be.
And then we encountered Joel Salatin's, one of his original books, Salad Bar Beef, which probably is experiencing its 25th birthday this year. It's really been around a while. We ran into that, and we read about holistic grazing. For the word holistic, read God's plan. So holistic grazing. That's daily pasture moves to grow more grass, better grass, more fertile soil, healthier animals, for more of the year. So this was an easy change for us to make. We'd gotten past the fears we had with a big animal. We'd gotten past our fears about milking and how much milk we'd get. So when it came to just moving animals every day, that is not a difficult task. This is easy equipment, and we began moving. We read about what Joel had to say about if you will manage your animals on daily moves, you will grow more grass, better grass, more of the time. And we were up for that. So we got the equipment, we got out there, and began moving Isabella every day. Isabella, now we had 2 cows.
And I'm going to interrupt for just a second because I'm watching our clock and we're doing very well on time.
Good.
Okay, you might be over here watching the clock too. Okay.
Well, I sort of dodged like this at some point.
Good. So
I think what
this is the surprise that many people have, is they think, how big is a paddock? How much do you give a cow for 24 hours? It's the size of your living room. Okay? People
you
say,
have a big living
it's going to
room.
be 3 acres. No. It's the size of your living. And how many living rooms do you have in an acre? You have 60. You have 60 days of food in your acre for your animal before they ever have to go back and start over again. 2 months. That really changes a lot of people how they see this thing. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Obviously, these aren't hard numbers, right? Like if you have a really big cow, she's going to eat differently. If you have a Dexter, she's going to eat differently from a Holstein. But one of the things we realized early on in this journey was a little bit of land is a lot of land if you know how to use it. And when we began practicing holistic grazing with daily moves, a ton of stuff changed. Do I get to go into that?
I think.
Yeah. So.
And one of the things that changed is no more mowing. That's a good thing.
And we had grass. So for a while there, with conventional grazing, which means the animal has access to the whole pasture all the time, what happens is she eats what she likes the best. And then when it regrows, she eats it again. And in the meantime, the stuff she doesn't like as much is getting big and woody. And over time, her dietary intake is decreasing in value, right? She's on a nutritional nosedive, and so is your pasture, because she's going to kill the stuff that she likes the best. And in the middle of the summer, you're going to find there's not a whole lot out there growing, and you're feeding hay in July. If you're feeding hay in July, you either have too many cows or you're not grazing properly. When we started instituting daily moves in holistic grazing, the first thing that happened was there was no summer slump. All of a sudden, we had grass to get us all the way through the summer and well into November or even December. That's zone 6A, right here where we are now. That grass quality was going up. So we were getting more milk in the bucket on a healthier cow. The cow's ability to discern the difference between food plants and medicinal plants grows because in a small paddock, she's going to try everything that's important for her to eat. A cow is hardwired to run away when she's threatened. So she always eats high energy foods first, because if a lion might jump on you at any moment, you want to always have plenty of sugar in the tank so you can run for it, right? So she'll eat sugar first, unless you put her in competition with a bunch of pasture mates. If there are a whole lot of cows in a small space, she'll just eat as fast as she can to make sure she gets her share. Or if you put her in a very tiny paddock where she simply doesn't have as many options, she's going to eat more species of plant, including her medicinal plants and her mineral supplement plants. So all of a sudden, we had a cow that knew a lot more about the plants she was eating and was eating them for greater health and productivity. Do I keep going?
Yep.
Okay. So the other thing that this is going to do, and it did it immediately, you see the difference in your pastures within weeks when you institute holistic grazing. One of the ways that happens is that when a cow is held in a small space, Now, a bunch of cows can do this better than one, because a bunch of cows do a lot of skirmishing and sort of arguing about who's going to eat what. One cow, if she's the only one in the paddock, she knows she has no competition for each bite. But if you hold her in a small space, whatever she doesn't eat gets trampled, manured on, or urinated on. That means it's all going to break down into the soil quickly and feed the soil microbiome. So it's not just going to feed it, it's also going to add organic matter to it. So to give you an example, in, well, I would say 10 years on a farm that we rent that had no topsoil. That's no topsoil. It was yellow clay with about a half an inch of organic matter sitting on top. That farm built at least 6 inches of topsoil. I didn't want to test the Lord and keep digging and see how far down it went, so I didn't. But in the pastures, we found that there were 6 inches of topsoil that the cows had built themselves. That made a huge difference to the land's ability to retain water. David's wonderful talk right before us, talking about mineral availability in the soil being related directly to the soil life. Minerals are made available to plants by the fungi and bacteria and et cetera that live in the soil, but they have to be fed first before they can make those minerals available to the plants. And all of a sudden, our pastures were as biodiverse, the soil biota were as biodiverse as more biodiverse than the highest quality crop field you can think of, because they're constantly being fed by the trampling that's going on in this holistic grazing. Changed our lives. No more grain. No more cows that got sick and needed to see the vet. No meds, no wormers, no vaccines. Where am I? That's because grass, when it's grazed, makes things better. You know how your spiritual life is, where if you'll give God something, he'll give you back more. And the more you give, the bigger his gifts get. Nature is one of his gifts, and it works just like that. If we'll handle it the way he handles it, bunch our animals together, hold them tight and keep them moving. Don't let them come back until the grass is regrown. His gifts mount up much faster than what we're giving him back. He loves to give us presents.
Holistic grazing taught us that sunlight would grow grass, grass could grow cows, and we don't need any grain. Our cows have never had grain. They've not had grain when they lactate. They do not have grain when they are calves.
And they don't have grain when we fatten them to go in the freezer either.
Cows grow milk, and you could be certain of the health in every one of those steps. There's no pollution, there's no toxic chemicals, there's no break in that chain. Ultra healthy, chemical-free milk, ultra clean, chemical-free meat, and it costs us almost nothing. We are on pasture all year round because we've been taking care of our pastures. We give our animals hay when there is ice on top of snow. That's what they don't like going through. They have no trouble getting through snow. So they are on pasture all year round. And it didn't stop there. All this milk processing meant that we had many, many, many gallons of ultra healthy, nutrient dense, chemical free skim milk, buttermilk, whey. And what do you do with all those gallons and gallons of surplus and byproduct? You feed everything else on the farm. Bottle calves absolutely love milk, but we would rather them being raised by mom. That's the best way to raise a calf. Pigs absolutely love milk. Chickens love milk, especially if you take that milk and let it sit on the counter for about a day or two.
So
She's in charge of a lot of this, so I defer to her.
Chickens love milk, but they especially love clabbered milk, which means you give it's gotten thick from sitting on the counter. Raw milk is naturally probiotic. The things that you think of as being probiotic, like yogurt, right, which have good bacteria in them, got that bacteria, protein, and calcium.
So the milk also is very good for your gardens. okay? It's a great, if you've got problems with roses and things like
Right.
that.
Let's roll back to what David was talking about a few minutes ago, where he was talking about feeding the soil for specific results, and that one of the most useful things you can do for your soil microbes is provide them with protein. Guess what one of the best side dressings you can put in your garden is? A very dilute solution of milk and water. We're talking 30-to-1 to 10-to-1, water to milk, as a side dressing, as a foliar spray, as a drench for your garden plants. The spare milk that you end up with in your kitchen, because if a cow is producing you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gallons of milk a day, depending on the season, you've got a lot of milk. You can afford to donate that milk to a lot of different places. And one of the best places you can put, not just, you can rinse your milk bucket, right, and pour it on the rose bushes and get rid of the black spot, because a 1 to 10 dilution of milk to water is the best antifungal you can think of for your plants. Actually, if you go online, you look this up, you'll find plant scientists who develop chemical sprays as antifungals will sort of quietly admit that raw milk, it doesn't have to be raw, milk in water is as good an antifungal as anything they know, right? So we can use spare milk to grow other things, to improve other things on our farm. Because what it comes down to is this. God makes life with the sun. All the life energy on the planet starts as sunlight. It lands on a leaf somewhere. Photosynthesis happens. And those carbohydrates and proteins and fats David was talking about happen in the leaf. And anything that isn't a green plant has to get its energy at first or second or third hand from a plant. When you begin harvesting your land's native, perennial, diverse, volunteer crop, we're standing on it, it's called grass or pasture. When you begin harvesting that through the guts of a ruminant who can digest it, you can't, it's mostly cellulose and that goes right through you, but a cow can break it down. When you begin harvesting that solar energy through a dairy cow, all of a sudden you have it available for every other use on the farm. All the other things that you need to do, feed the people, feed the chickens, feed the dogs, cats, pigs, feed the soil, you've now got access to that solar energy you need to do that.
There is a temptation, okay? We were just in outside of Nashville, and somebody was at a conference, and they said, do you know what people are selling raw milk for? They said that they are selling raw milk for $12 a quart. Crazy, okay? But
Which means
it
we
is
should run
that
out
good.
and sell all our milk.
It is that good, and that's a temptation to say, my extra milk, I'm going to sell off the farm. We would strongly suggest don't do that. Stay inside the farm. Feed the farm from the farm. Use all these things on the farm. The little bit of money that you get from selling things off, it really doesn't.
It's not that there's never a time for selling spare nutrients. If you keep chickens, there's a point in the year where you think, oh my gosh, there's no way I can consume all these eggs. And it can be very appropriate to market them to your neighbors. What unfortunately often happens to homesteaders is that homesteading is a way of saying, I think there's another way to provide for my family other than cash, right? Cash is how town people get all their goods. Can I do this? Okay.
No.
He says I have to be quiet. Come to our talk.
That's right.
At what time do we speak this afternoon?
3:30, but I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Okay. So what do we need to succeed? What is it that we need to succeed? The first thing we need to succeed is believe that God made a world that works and He loves us, and if we will follow His pattern, it will work. Believe that. That's really important. And believe it when there's a dead animal at your feet, okay? That's when it's hard to believe. And believe it when you have had another problem. That's the first thing we have to do. The second thing we have to do is need it, okay? We're in a world that has everything. Supermarket, Walmart will deliver to your door. You have to decide that I need it, and if you don't need it, fake it, okay? One thing that's really helping is that our systems are so bad The ag system is terrible. The educational system is better. The financial systems are terrible. All the systems are so bad that we have to do this ourselves. Believe that. Need it. Decide that I want to do this homesteading because it's going to be best for me. It's going to be best for my family. It's going to be best for my garden. It's going to be best for my children. And the third thing we need is the pattern. How do we do this? Come to our talk at 3:30, and we'll talk to you a little bit more about that. But it starts with the dairy cow, with free grass, a ruminant that's going to give you milk, meat, and manure, and it's going to feed everything on the farm. You've got to graze correctly, and when we were learning all this, we said we've got to write this down. So we did write a book called The Independent Farmstead. It is available. We'll be over at our tent in Tent C. We love to talk to people. We love to help people. We love to answer your questions, so you can come see us. But this is the book that we wrote to help you get started and learning God's pattern. So we would encourage you to do that. It is a little bit of a commercial. We always feel a little bit uncomfortable with that, but it is a good book. Now what Chelsea Green is asking us to do is write a whole series of books that go into this. This is the first one, called One Cow Revolution. And we wrote it so that we're standing at your elbow when you get that cow. We are currently writing, we've just finished one on micro grazing, on intensive grazing. The one we're working on right now is on milk. Then there's going to be one on feeding the farm from the farm, then on how the whole year works. So we've got a whole series of books that will be coming out that are trying to help the homesteader do what we do. Our mission, our love, would be if there were a million little farms just like ours all over the country. It would transform our country to have that happen, because that's what we need. We need 1 million independent farms ready to take on anything that might come at us.
So what's going to get in the way? What do we need to do to prepare for this? First of all, we need to declare ourselves free from giving into convenience, because convenience is all at our elbow. Every time I open my stupid desktop computer, I think, oh my gosh, right? This is going to make my life so much easier. It wants to hand me everything, and we have to...
10 seconds.
We have to avoid convenience, avoid bad models. If you're having to bring in a lot of inputs, you're probably using a bad model.
We're finished, yeah.
Okay, he says I have to be done.
Thank you very much. Take your microphone. Thank you, John.
One cow at a time. Thank you very much. Wanted to do a little bit of a shout out for our sponsors. Some of these are companies, some of them are individuals. My friend Benny Mass started a trucking company, and he was very gracious to support us and be a gold sponsor, actually. And then we have Junior Miller. Now, Junior was, I think, the second patient at St. George Clinic in Germany. So that's why he's sponsoring. He wanted to share his success. Now, we were talking about books. Now, I've been a ferocious reader my entire life. And when you talk about hot off the press, my new book, which is also available here, is hot off the press. It's publishing today. It arrived yesterday afternoon at 2 o'clock. I signed some of them for you. It's titled The Good Samaritans, From the Well to Worship in Spirit and Truth. So if you're interested in that topic, you'll learn a little bit more about the well than maybe you ever knew. So we have those available for you back there, and I'll be happy to sign one. Okay. Next speaker is Teresa Holler. She is from Victory Health, and she will be talking about mental health symptoms and brain inflammation. Please welcome Teresa Holler.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you the whole point of the lecture right at the beginning, so then you can feel free to nod in and out of the rest. And the one thing I want to make sure everyone is aware of is that When you have chest pain, you see a cardiologist. When you have all these different symptoms, you go to different doctors. But when you have a psychiatric symptom, you don't think about it as an organ that can be corrected physiologically. We think of it as a psychiatric condition that you have to live with. And I'd like to break that thought process and say the brain is an organ, and if an organ is sick, let's try to correct that sickness and recover the person from the symptoms. And psychiatric symptoms can be corrected without psychiatric meds. Yay. So we're going to start. So that's all you need to know. So thank you and good night. So what we're going to do is start with a story. I'm going to tell you Sarah's story. And so Sarah began having tormented compulsions and voices in the 4th grade. The voice was always in the first person, and this is important because if you ask a child if they're having voices, they think it's them. They feel ashamed, and they don't usually tell their mother or father that they're having these thoughts because they think that it's them and they feel bad. So what it is, it's in the first person, and in this case, it told her to do things that she knew would hurt herself or others. And one time she felt compelled to jump off the lifeguard stand, and you see Sarah. She actually became a lifeguard as she got older, but that's her sitting in the lifeguard stand that at one point, this voice was telling her when she was little to jump off of. And she knew if she jumped off it, she would hurt herself. But the voice just wouldn't let up. And she said it was just easier to just jump than to constantly fight the voice. And so she did, and she rolled her ankle. And fortunately, the physical symptoms resolved quickly, but the emotional pain of her losing that battle was the hardship that she had to live with. And so unfortunately, those voices escalated after that. They began to tell her to steal things, to make false accusations that would have devastated innocent people's lives, to take pills, and even to end her life. Thankfully, the repercussions of these other thoughts were so bad that she never ever felt inclined to do those. Once the voice told her, moving objects with your mind is fun, you should try it. And that sounds like witchcraft, doesn't it? And then when she felt so hopeless and she wanted to end her life because the voices just wouldn't let up on her, the voice said to her, God hasn't healed you. Come down to me and I will. What does that sound like? And so these are the ways her symptoms began. When she got to middle school, she began compulsive confessing, and other people's actions began to affect her as well. She would have to keep a list of everything she saw that people did that was wrong and confess it to her mother at the end of each day. By the 7th and 8th grade, she wanted to die. She just wanted to give up. Everywhere she went, she had a compulsion to do something to end her life. She believed the only way to get the voices to stop was to just do that. It would be an easier, quicker fix, just do it. But instead, she went to her parents and she told them. Her parents immediately began to pray, and her father gripped her by the shoulders and shook her and said, in the name of Jesus, this has to go. This is not of you. And it did. The voice stopped for a time. But the torment always recurred. And they decided they needed to discover what is the root cause, what is doing this. And so her parents had been taking her to prayer meeting after prayer meeting, and she ended up in a deliverance ministry. And somebody very astute told her, you don't need deliverance. You need fine-tuning of your hearing. The heavenly is harder to hear than the dark. And the Lord says, you are his sheep, and you hear his voice. And a stranger's voice you will not follow. We need to pray to fine-tune your senses so that heaven is louder. And then she said directly to Sarah, the Lord speaks to you all the time. When you say no and you try to fight back, that's the Holy Spirit fighting back for you. And that gave her some tools, that gave her some hope that she could fight this. But she still had to fight the battles, and the battles were exhausting her. And so at some point, a pastor said, you know what? You need to discover the root cause physically. You need to look into physical medicine. And that's when the light bulb went off. Her family had her tested for infections, and it turned out she was positive for both mycoplasma and Lyme disease. And in my clinical practice, whenever I hear someone having voices, it's almost always mycoplasma. And the herbs that treat Lyme also treat mycoplasma. So the same treatments usually will work for both. Same with the antibiotics. And so 1 Peter 5:8 says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Be sober and alert, because the enemy is prowling around. And what I have discovered through the years of treating these patients with brain inflammation is that why, you think it's just got to be demonic. These voices sound like they're coming from the pit of hell. This has got to be a prayerful issue, a spiritual issue. But what I realized is that you can't be sober-minded when your brain is inflamed, because to be sober is to have sanity, reason, emotional balance. So if you have an infection causing brain inflammation or mold or other causes, then the enemy's going to see an opportunity. And he's going to prowl around, and that's what we're seeing in these kids. So what we need to do is discover what is the physical cause. And in Sarah's case, once we identified that cause, the dark thoughts no longer had access, and she no longer had to fight the battles that were exhausting her. She did really well. She ended up going off to college years later, and she said that she had one little flare when she was in mold. It felt like her, quote, brain was on fire, unquote, and she took a few herbs, and that went away. So when I asked if I could share her story today, she told me she was grateful for the experience she had. Because of this experience, she was able to help so many other people, even in her young life. She became a resident advisor in her college, and she said that nearly every single person had a mental health disorder. In fact, her dorm wing that she was in charge of had the highest number of mental health crises in the entire college. And she said she was uniquely poised to help. She was able to help them breathe through their panic attacks, silence dark voices, and even hold their knives after they had been done cutting themselves. And she's grateful to be able to help. And because of Sarah, I look at the tormented children who come to my medical practice, and I get down on my knees and I look them right in the eye. And a lot of times they won't look you in the eye. They're like this. And I'll say to them, do you have dark thoughts that are so bad that you hate having them? And I mean, almost every time they will lift their head, look me right in the eye, and they're like, I can't believe you knew that. And you'll see one tear go down, and they'll just nod their little head. And their mothers are like, what? What? How did you know that? And these are the questions I would have never thought to ask had it not been for Sarah. And then I teach them how to fight back. And then I teach them that we're going to find the root causes so that they don't have to keep fighting back. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. What are these root causes physiologically? Remember what I said, the brain is an organ. And when organs get sick, you get the symptoms that correlate with what the organ is for. And what does the brain do? It's cognition, but it's also psychiatric. It's our emotional health and well-being. And so we're in the middle of an epidemic of emotional torment. And I'm sure that everyone in the audience could attest that they know someone they love who has suffered with mental torment of some sort. And so there's a condition called PANDAS. Has anyone here heard of PANDAS? So this is an impressive amount of people who have. PANDAS was the original definition from an astute doctor who discovered that brain inflammation caused by inflamed. So you can see motor things like tics, like we mentioned. Choreiform movements is pretty classic with strep, and that's where they have dancey movements. I did have a patient with those dancey movements, and funny, after we recovered her, she became a dancer. So she's, her mother was a dance instructor. Mood issues, so this is where obsessive compulsive disorder comes in. If you know someone who's been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, always, 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 always consider PANS. Always treat it as if it's PANS, because there's no such thing as a psychiatric disorder other than people who've had major traumatic events. That's purely psychiatric. But we're looking at some other cause, and we can, if we get to the bottom of it and we really look, we don't always get it on the first try. Don't give up, but don't just assume, oh, this needs psychiatric medicine, because that's giving up. So OCD, emotional lability, anger, rage, tantrums, clinginess. In older children, it looks like wanting to stay in your room and maybe play video games and not socialize. Poor handwriting is classic, clumsiness, slow processing, and sensitivity to things like the tags on clothes or lights or smells or anything. But it does not always look the same. So I'm going to tell you some of my different types of patients that had this. One was a rising high school senior who became completely catatonic, couldn't move. He was contemplating self-harm, and he was involuntarily committed. In other words, if you take a child with PANS or PANDAS who's self-harming or thinking about self-harming to the emergency room, they can be medically kidnapped. You can lose the ability to keep them because they have an involuntary commitment in many states, and that happened to this patient. We were able to get him back, and I recovered him in 7 days, even though he was catatonic and was told, his mother was told he'd be permanently on psych meds the rest of his life. He's been off all psych medicine after that 7-day period. I had a junior Olympic athlete and Harvard-bound student who just graduated from Harvard, and he couldn't remember that addition was even a thing. I'm sorry, multiplication, that's an error. He couldn't remember that multiplication was a thing. And so he's getting ready to take his SATs, preparing to go to Harvard, and he didn't even know that multiplication was a thing. So we recovered him, and he graduated from Harvard. I had an elementary student who was throwing knives at her siblings, and the parents had to pull them out of the wall. She tried to murder her siblings. She had Bartonella, and she also lived in mold. And I've had excessive hand washing with raw hands. I've had bedwetting, poor academic performance. Someone who went to school one day came home high-pitched shrieking and never stopped. Children jumping out of moving cars. Anorexia is huge. If you have a child who is refusing to eat, there's brain inflammation. Losing more than 10% of body weight is an emergency. Unable to speak or withdrawn, not looking you in the eye. So what is PANS? The definitions here, this is a scientific definition for research. You don't have to meet all this specifically. If you have mental health issues, consider this regardless of whether you fit into this strict category. And it can happen at any age. The P means pediatric, but if you take the P away, adults get this, we just call it different things. And so this is going to be a behavioral deterioration, anxiety, emotional lability, up, down, all around, irritable, rage, depression, regression, deterioration in school performance, sleep disturbances, urinary frequency, and on and on and on. So when should we actually think about this? To just simplify it, look at the handwriting from one side to the other. Handwriting deterioration happens in 90% of children with this type of brain inflammation. So in little kids, it's pictures. They used to draw pretty pictures, and now they're like stick figures. That can be the classic sign of PANS. So if you know what their handwriting is like, take a look at it when they're acting out and see if it's the same. And so these are going to be symptoms of OCD or eating restrictions or a sudden decline in school or tics. And then if they have any of these other physiological symptoms, that's going to add to the possibility of your being correct. So what's happening here? It's a total immune lack of tolerance. The immune dysfunction is just extreme. And you heard Del Bigtree today talk about the vaccination component of immune system dysfunction. And I have been working at a new facility with Amish and Mennonite patients, most of whom are unvaccinated. And they all are having this condition too. All of them were exposed to mold, and most of them had tick-borne diseases on top of it. So there are other things that can cause this in addition to vaccines. What I'd like to point out is that I'll be speaking tomorrow in the medical tent about those cases and a specific protocol you can use to recover and stabilize a child with PANS before you even know what the cause is. And I'll show you the success rate we had with that. So this is a total immune lack of tolerance. You want to consider infections, including viruses, including mold, mycotoxins, nutrient issues, toxicities, et cetera. These are clues. So what do you do when you have a child who's acting out with rage and is not listening to you and you can't discipline them? Do you need to discipline them stronger? Right? We don't want to spare the rod and spoil the child, but you can't discipline a child who has brain inflammation. It's not their fault. They have no idea what they're doing. They come out of it and they feel very sorry. One of the things you can do is you can take your hands and place them gently over the child's eyes, and if the eyeballs are jumping around behind your hand, you know, not when they're looking one way or the other, you can feel the eye moving, but you'll feel them literally just jumping, then their brain is inflamed. And you know, this is not a child that needs to be disciplined. This is a child that needs a brain stabilization protocol. And one of the other things that we do on exam in the clinic is we have them stand with their hands outright, close their eyes, and watch them for about 10 seconds. If their hands start to flip, that's not a good sign. If they start to fall, that's not a good sign. And the other one is if they start playing the piano. Their hands just start to do this. And that's choreiform movement, and that's classic for PANDAS. So the testing that most practitioners will do are listed here. I like to be a minimalist. I like to do as little testing as possible to save people money, but I don't want to miss the things that are important. So sometimes it means I have to try 2 or 3 times to get the diagnosis, but you can literally save thousands by doing that. If money is not an issue, then you can do everything right out of the gate. But most of the time what we're doing is we're doing an antibody to strep, we're looking at viral antibody panels, we're doing a really good tick-borne disease testing, mold testing. The Cunningham panel is about $900, so I don't order that. I've ordered it maybe 3 times in patients who really wanted to know, and they were all positive. Frat testing is looking for an issue with folate. So folate is a B vitamin that has to cross the blood-brain barrier to get into the brain. And in children with PANS, 68% of the time, it's not working. And it's not working because of an autoimmune disorder with the receptor. And so these kids need a high dose of something called folinic acid. And otherwise, they don't get folate in their brain. If you don't get folate in the brain, you can't make neurotransmitters, and you're just going to be a mess. And so you can test for that with a frat test, or you can give them folinic acid. And there's a brand called Designs for Health that I use called Super Liquid Folate, and we dose it up and see how it helps. I'm going to give that whole protocol with dosing tomorrow in the other tent at 2:30. And I have a handout for it as well at the NutriMedics tent. We can give you the whole protocol in a handout. It's not really a protocol, it's kind of, you modify it. So the basic treatment approach is right here. This is what I do to recover these patients. Foundational support, nutritional, lifestyle, all the basics that you're learning here. Frat testing if needed, or just treating with folinic. Anti-inflammatories are the mainstay of both diagnosis and treatment. If you have a child raging like that and you give them an Aleve, not a gel cap, because ew, it's disgusting, and they get better, then you know inflammation's involved. So it can be diagnostic. You can just give one dose. I don't rely on Aleve or Motrin due to side effects, but I use them for a brief in and out if I need to. That's a better emergency than going to the emergency room, in my opinion. Fish oil, phospholipids, curcumin, SPMs are also called resolvins, are other anti-inflammatories that are more natural. So I switch to those and load them on until they're stable. Mast cell support. Does anyone here know what a mast cell is? Mast cell activation syndrome? Okay, so mast cells historically were thought of as the allergy cell. They release histamine and cause allergies, but forms of luteolin can't get into the brain. So it's the one that I use in my practice. And I combine it with NutriHist from NutriMedics, and they're here today, which has more support. And then I use antihistamines only if those two are not enough. Things like Allegra, things like Pepcid. I don't like drugs, so I only use them if I need them, and I very rarely do. And then there's an enzyme called DAO, diamine oxide, and that is an enzyme that helps to keep histamine from coming from foods. So if someone's eating and then having histamine reactions, we use that. We want to improve the body's ability to drain their toxins. We do that with something called berberpinella. And then we have to figure out what the root cause is. And that's where the lab tests come in, but most importantly, a really good history and physical. You spend an hour with a patient and ask questions, and you get the answers. They tell you what's wrong. So what I do is I guess the answer so I can start treatment sooner, and then the labs come in to confirm it. And then what I do is I layer immune modulators on board, because it's the immune system that's broken. Why do I not layer the immune modulators in on day one when they're super inflamed? Because immune modulators often will also kill infections, and we don't want a single die-off reaction when they're already on the edge. We want to stabilize them over 3 to 7 days. That's all it takes, 3 to 7 days. And then we start the immune modulators. And once we get the immune modulators on board and we stabilize them, the root cause labs will come in, we work on that, and then we start weaning them off as many of these things as we can, because we want to not spend a fortune on treatment. And these kids recover. Some of them will need 1 or 2 herbs long term as immune modulators. But if you look at the conventional way of treating this condition, it is prophylactic antibiotics until adulthood. And imagine what that does to your microbiome, among other things. So we don't do that. We use nice herbs that are good for the microbiome. So I'm not going to cover the rest of these slides in 9 minutes, but I want you to see them. I'll be covering this tomorrow in greater detail. But the lifestyle interventions that I used are listed here, and they're very simple. Humic fulvic mineral water is fabulous. Organic, nutrient-dense diet. Most of these kids, if not all of them, do need to be gluten and dairy-free. Dairy we can play with later once they're stable, but gluten tends to be longer term. Sunshine is important, movement, being outdoors, infrared sauna only if tolerated. On day one, if their mast cells are activated, that's probably not going to be tolerated. But Epsom salt foot baths could be tolerated, and that can be helpful as well. And I did use the Ion Cleanse foot bath in the patients that I'll show you tomorrow. You don't have to have that, it's a bonus. Dietary supports here, you're going to hear that here. The anti-inflammatories I used are listed here. Most people forget about phospholipids. That's PC. That is really important. That's how you heal the cell. That's how you heal the membranes so that toxins can leave the cell and nutrients can get in. If you want to heal a cell, everyone talks about that now on the internet like it's a big deal. It's PC. It's basically get your phospholipids in. Anti-inflammatories are listed here. Some of the herbs that I like to use are also potent antimicrobials. These are Peruvian herbs, and I'll show you some of the research. I'm actually speaking tonight here at 4 o'clock on how to treat the tick-borne diseases, and I will present the evidence for many of these herbs tonight. So immune modulation. We want the immune system to stop being tilted, to be, out of control, out of balance. Remember that basic things like certain probiotic strains do that. Digestive enzymes do that. Colostrum in the early breast milk, that does it. Vitamin D, so make sure your level is good. All those do it. And then we move to the herbals, Cemento, Hatunia, and Chinese skullcap. And then low-dose naltrexone is a compounded prescription that many practitioners will use for autoimmunity. I don't often use it because the Cemento does the same thing and it's herbal. But if I need another tool, I use low-dose naltrexone because I don't want to use IV immunoglobulin. A lot of people will, and it's not wrong, and if you need it, you use it. But IV immunoglobulin is pooled blood from hundreds of people. Can you imagine how many infections you're going to be exposed to with that pooled blood? But if you have a child who has this condition, you'll see why. If that's what you need to recover, you use that tool if you need it. But when you're doing the things I'm doing, in my 15 years of treating thousands of these kids, I think I've referred 3 for IVIG, and that was 10 years ago when I didn't know as much as I know now. So why do we want to not rely on ibuprofen or naproxen? In addition to the standard side effects that most of us are aware of, they actually inhibit the electron transfer chain, which is the final step of making energy in your mitochondria. So you're going to be damaging that process of making energy, and everything needs energy to heal. So we don't want to use them long term, but I absolutely love to throw them in on day one and just see what happens, because it can be remarkable. Takuna is the most potent anti-inflammatory natural product I'm aware of. It was actually tested head-to-head against a prescription drug called Feldene. Now, Feldene was a prescription drug that was so strong, it was toxic and taken off the market. So Takuna was more than twice as effective as Feldene as an anti-inflammatory. So you're gonna get profound anti-inflammatory benefits with Takuna. The problem with Takuna, the reason I don't use it on day 1, I wait for day 3 through 7, is that it's also the most potent antiviral I'm aware of, either drug or herbal. It is really potent, and so we don't want a potent die-off on day 1. We want to stabilize for a few days, and then when they're more stable and we can handle a little bit of a die-off, I will layer this in 1 drop at a time, 1 drop twice a day, and then bring that dose up to the dose that's effective for that child. I usually dose Takuna at 30 to 40 drops per dose for adults, 20 drops twice a day, usually for, unless it's acute, for kids 6 to 12, and then 10 drops twice a day for kids 2 to 6. Resolvins are also called SPMs. These are over the counter. These actually block viral replication. They decrease these inflammatory immune markers like TNF-alpha. NLRP3 is a very potent inflammasome, and it decreases that. And this will actually stop flares instantly, including really bad ticks. They're absolutely incredible. I dose those 2 twice a day typically, and I will say that they stop working after 3 to 5 days. So you're gonna get a parent who comes in and said, that was incredible, I got my child back. And then they're gonna cry and say it stops working. And so my reasoning for why I think that happens is that, God didn't make a mistake in designing the body. And what we're doing is turning off an immune pathway here. And if your body's trying to fight something, your body's gonna find a way to fight it. So what I like to do with SPMs then is use them for rescue days, where they put them in intermittently and they will still work. So when you're having a really, really bad day, or the child has a test or an athletic event, or you're going to church that day, whatever it might be, you can give them the SPMs and then pull them out. And then when you address the root cause, the body doesn't have any reason to fight, and then the SPMs will put the fire out and it'll stay out, and that's the goal. Curcumin is more potent than ginger, and also the prescription anti-inflammatory indomethacin. So we love curcumin as an anti-inflammatory. And there's actually a liquid form called Avea from Nutrimedix. So kids love liquids. They all go in the same cup for convenience, which makes it easy. The problem with curcumin, many of you who've bought curcumin might notice that black pepper is in the product, or piperine is what black pepper might be called. The reason for that is that it's not easy to absorb the curcumin and get it, they're called pharmacokinetics, get it where it needs to go, and the pepper will activate that. So what we like to do is look for what's called in vivo trials, meaning not trials done in test tubes, trials done inside tissue or cells, so we know, does this actually work inside? And so Avea was tested head-to-head with the antidepressant fluoxetine, which is an antidepressant drug. And you can see that at the higher dose, it had decent efficacy, so we know it works. Avea is used by Nancy O'Hara, who's like a famous doctor who treats PANS and PANDAS. She uses it a dropper full every 10 minutes for panic attacks in her children, and they'll come out of it really quickly. I like to use it more for prevention, like 2 or 3 dropperfuls in a water bottle, sip on it throughout the day so you don't decompensate. So it's great for anxiety, great for panic attacks, great for depression, and great for PANS due to the effect on inflammation. Low-dose naltrexone can be used in place of the IV immunoglobulin. Like I said, I try to avoid that, so I'll add that only if needed. Cemento, I'm going to talk about this more later today and then again tomorrow, so I'm going to skip this. But it is a form of cat's claw that has clinical research for inflammation, and other cat's claw is not good for immune modulation. If it's not Cemento, don't use cat's claw because it's immune stimulating. We do not want to immune stimulate these kids. So all these studies you'll see later. The mast cell activation we'll look at later. So I want to just go into the root causes briefly. I've got 2 minutes left. So the question is, could it be mold? Yes. Mold toxins have been shown in animal studies to be neurotoxic and actually to reduce IQ. And it's these indoor exposures that tripled the risk for low IQ, not food, indoor mold. So the neurological effects of mold toxins include mental confusion, cognitive, physical, emotional symptoms, impaired attention, think ADHD, ADD, depression, excitotoxicity, abnormal hearing, abnormal verbal learning, processing speed, reaction, visual spatial memory, poor word recall, impaired balance. So could it be mold? Yes. Could it be Lyme? Yes. Could it be all the other tick-borne diseases? Yes, and often it is, Bartonella especially. So if you have neuropsychiatric symptoms, you really need to think about Lyme, and you must try to look for that and treat that. And patients with PANS, PANDAS frequently have multiple infections, not just one. And there's been a lot of studies. We'll just skip all these, okay? These are the symptoms for Lyme. Developmental disorders, autism spectrum disorders, schizoaffective, that's schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, anxiety, panic, eating disorders, eating disorders, eating disorders. Please don't go to a clinic that's gonna starve your child. Treat their brain inflammation if they have an eating disorder, please, please, please. And on and on. Here's a study of 37 youth that were diagnosed with pediatric bipolar disorder. And guess what? 50% of them had Babesia, 50% of them had Bartonella, and on, because they had multiple infections. Lyme was only in the 20%, so you have to look for these other co-infections, not just Lyme. Sheltering Wings is a retreat for Anabaptist patients who need help for their children with PANS and PANDAS. It just opened in Newville, Pennsylvania. There's a phone number here. Please mark it down. If you don't have time to mark it down, you can go to New Light's booth or NutriMedic's booth, and we'll give you the number. But this is where I'll be presenting the data of the first 7 children that came through, and we will have an inpatient facility to stabilize these children over 2 to 3 weeks. And we're going to skip all this. One last thing to say. If there's psychosis, you have to look for Bartonella. And this is a study that showed in adults with psychosis, 43% of them had Bartonella DNA in their bloodstream. And those who did not have psychosis, only 14% had Bartonella in their bloodstream. So you have to think about Bartonella. And the blood tests are terrible. Do the blood test. If it's positive, great. But if it's negative, put them on Bartonella herbs because you want to cover for that. Don't just think someone has a psychiatric disorder. The brain is an organ, and the organ's getting infected. Thank you.
All right. So now we have a real treat, but before that, I want to do a shout out for Walnut Creek Foods. Walnut Creek is the reason, I was going to say for the season, but Walnut Creek Foods is actually the reason this event exists because they came to me during COVID when they couldn't get canning lids, and that's how it has all started. So they've been a sponsor all along. The next speaker is what I'm going to call the real deal. Say, Ivan Keim, a Amish homesteader from this community. He and his wife Emma have 4 children and 1 adopted. So they have 12 acres, and he's just going to come up and he's going to walk you through how an Amish homestead actually works. Please put your hands together for Mr. Ivan Keim.
Greetings. I'm humbled to be with you, but it's also a pleasure to be with you. It's been an encouraging morning. We've heard a lot of good things, and just to be with like-minded people, inspiring, and inspires us, we can go home and put it to practice. You know, one thing as I was preparing for this talk, I talked to an older gentleman and asked him, what are some things that we should be thinking about? And one of the things he said, get new friends. And I was kind of struggling with that because I like all my friends. And then he said, because we are going against the trend, we need friends to encourage us. And that's what conventions like today do. So I split my talk into 3 different sections. First, we're going to talk about a way of life. We're going to go back into American history, and then we're going to talk about the American dream. Really, what got us to where we are today. And then I'd like to give you some steps. Homesteading with a purpose, things that we can do, apply today. So a way of life, we think about back in the 1600s, the 1700s, we had flocks of Europeans coming to America. They wanted to stake out their claim. They wanted to have a new, something better for their future generations. And we can kind of let our mind wander how some of their homesteads may have looked. You know, I'm sure they had a cow, and they were cutting trees, making way for pasture, and they had chickens for their eggs and butchering, and they weren't the White Mountain broilers with the big heavy breasts today, but obviously they got meat out of those as well, and they got eggs, and I'm sure they had a porker. Every homestead should have a pig, because we have table scraps. We have everything that we don't eat, a pig eats. And eventually that pig will end up on the table in bacon, sausage, and ham. But those first years, you know, we think about the good old days. Those first years were hard. You know, they had plagues, they had smallpox, they had viruses and different things like that. But let's keep reminding ourselves why they came to America. They wanted something better for the future generations. And isn't that what we're here today? We want something better for our future generations. If we continue to do the same thing over and over, we will continue to get what we have always gotten. So we have to change. We have to make a difference. We have to change things. Here's one thing, an exchange of letters from John Adams to get our mind to think how some of our founding fathers thought. John Adams was our first vice president, and he was our second president. And an interesting note, does anybody know how John Adams became the first vice president? He was the number 2 vote getter in the election. How would that work today? Just to think how different their world was at that point to where we are today. John Adams, so this is what John Adams said to his wife. These were letters that were exchanged. He said, "Let us therefore, my dear partner, from the affection that we feel for our lovely babes," he was talking about his children, "apply ourselves by every way we can to the cultivation of our farm. Let frugality and industry be our virtues. Let us be frugal and have a good work ethic in the cultivation of our farm." So he said those were virtues. These were things that were important, to be frugal and have a good work ethic. But then he said, above all the cares of this life, let our ardent anxiety be to mold the minds and the manners of our children. Of everything else, it is more important to mold the minds and the manners of our children. And we're going to get into some a little more core and fundamental things when we think about the homestead. And this is what his wife wrote back. She said, "I seek wool and flax, and I can work willingly with my hands, though my household are not clothed with fine linen and scarlet. They are clothed with what is perhaps full and honorary." They didn't have any fancy clothes, but she was content. She said, "Plain and decent manufacture of my families, though I abound. I am not in want. I have neither poverty nor riches, but food which is convenient for me, and a heart to be thankful and content." A heart to be thankful and content. There's much to be said in that. I mentioned earlier about the challenges that they had. But today, we've moved from that era. Today, we have a generation growing up that think milk comes from the store, eggs come from a carton, bread is available in wheat or white. We have fruit that's either shipped from California or Florida. We have become so distanced from where our food comes from. So how did we go from the larder and the root cellar to Kroger's and Walmart? How did we get there? A story of how things change, and we can probably all relate to things like this in our lives. I can remember when I was a little boy, probably 4, 6, 8 years old, I'd climb up on the hack seat next to my dad, and we'd hitch up the horse and buggy, and we'd put our milk cans in the back that we just milked that morning. We pulled out of the water trough, we'd put it in the back of the hack and take a quarter-mile trek down the road to the dairy. There we'd dump the milk. We'd take our empty cans back home. The next day we'd repeat. And an important thing that happened every morning when we made that trek is as the neighboring farms all got together there, and the farmer would pull his hack up next to the rack, he'd put his cans in, and while his milk was being dumped, they kind of made this semicircle, and the morning news was shared. The community got together. It was a community event. But those things have changed. Today, that dairy is still there. They have added many more buildings. It's still in the same location. It's been sold twice. Today it is owned by a co-op from Norway. And all the milk that goes into that factory is surplus milk shipped in from Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan. Not a drop of milk coming from the local community. It's in the same spot that it was. So things have changed, and we can recognize this. One thing I tell everybody is the consumer votes with the pocketbook. The consumer votes with the pocketbook. And that makes the difference. So we're going to jump into the next part, chasing the American dream. We've all heard the American dream. Gary Miller states in his book, the introduction of his book, he says, "Where is Lazarus?" He says, "North Americans are globally famous for bigger, better, and faster. The American dream is a term for self-focused, self-reliant, and pleasurable living. North Americans are globally famous for bigger, faster, and better. And the American dream is a term for self-focused, self-reliant, and pleasurable living. Today, depression rates are soaring. Teen suicide rates continue to rise. Why should a 12-year-old want to take its life? Our emotional tank is empty. Is the American dream working for us? I'm going to take a quick journey, and then I'll come back on. When we think about what got us to where we are today, we're going to go back in 1869 in Promontory, Utah. We see the Central Pacific and the Northern Pacific coming together. We have the Transcontinental Railroad, the Golden Spike. We can now ship freight from east to west. The steel, the demand is raising. We have Andrew Carnegie and Henry Frick building their steel empires in Pittsburgh. We have Henry Ford in the early 1900s. We have the car industry enveloping in Detroit. We move to the 20s, the late 20s, the Great Depression happens. By 1933, we have 25% of the world, 25% of the Americans out of a job. Coming out of the roaring 20s, the farms were folding, industry was in high demand. December 7th, 1941, the Pearl Harbor attacks. In the height of the war, the United States built 86,000 warplanes in 1 year. Something happened that changed the social fabric of America forever. Those 86,000 warplanes were built mostly by women. While our men were in Europe and Japan fighting the Germans and the Japanese, our women left the homestead. We forward a couple decades to the 60s and the 70s, we find the women's rights movement. Our society, when we heard Sean Doherty talk about God made an orderly world, and it works. God designed us not as lesser or greater roles, but He designed us as distinct roles. God designed the man to be the provider and the leader in the home. And I like to say, the women are the heart of the home, the heartbeat. And when we as a society lost that distinction, our marriages suffered. Proverbs 31 Solomon talks about the perfect example of a homemaker. He lays it out perfectly. And when we lost that, our marriages suffered. Today, millions of children grow up in America without their father or mother in their home. We all know what happens. Thankfully, the homesteading community is bringing the moms back home, thankfully. So when the moms left with the absent of the home, we have a whole new industry waking up. We have a food, we heard about the kitchens. The kitchen tables are disappearing. Supermarkets evolved into behemoth shopping centers. Fast foods restaurant popping up on every corner. Family dinner table is transitioned to TV dinners and McDonald's down the road. Farms are no longer the bucolic landscape that provided for the family, but they have morphed into modern industrial profit centers fueled by fossil fuels. Anything from fertilizer to manufacturing equipment to the fueling of the 18-wheeler. Instead of figuring ways out to treat our animals with dignity, we are focused on feed conversion, speed from birth to slaughter. This has all allowed us to minimize the portion of our income. Did you know in 1914, 43% of our income was spent on food? Today it's less than 10%. Today it's less than. Our food is cheaper, but is it better? I think we all know that answer. And as we become more efficient and we become more self-reliant, we lose the effect of community. My uncle shared a story when we think about the effect of community. He said when he was growing up in the 60s and 70s, he said our family did not have enough money to buy a hay baler. But when our neighbor and us bound together, we could both afford a hay baler, or together we bought a hay baler. So when they baled hay, we went and helped them. When we baled hay, they came and helped us. He said it got to the point where we could both afford a hay baler, so we made our hay and they made their hay. And we can think about things like that as we go through life. Our human nature is the tendency to become self-efficient. We want to do it all ourselves, but that will weed out our community. It avoids the community from coming together, helping each other. Now, I'd also want to tell us, let's cut ourselves a little slack. Because we, our fathers and grandfathers, have done what every human being has done. If we can find an easier way to do it, we'll do it. But we have to be intentional. We have to be intentional. I mentioned earlier about the consumer votes with the pocketbook. So what can we do? Let's put our hands to the plow and not look back. Let's work together. So this brings me to the third part, which is homesteading with a purpose. And I want to talk about some things that we can do to be intentional. Be intentional. Know what kind of outcome we prefer and choose a lifestyle that will help us get there. Determine how we want our family to live and make incremental changes to get there. Write it down. Keep coming back to it. Do not be discouraged if it seems to be slow. We always overestimate what we can get done in a day, but we underestimate what we can get done in a year. We overestimate what we can get done in a day, but we underestimate what we can get done in a year. We always have this long to-do list and we never get it done, but when we sit and we look back over the last year, we are amazed how far that we've come. Make small incremental changes will help us get there. Let's not be discouraged. 3 steps when I think about restoring the homestead in today's society. The first one is food security, the second one is incorporating animals in chores, and the third one is recharging emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Number 1, food security. Without food, we die. We're all gone. So plant our gardens according to the vegetables that we eat. I was talking to a young man from our community, and he said he was getting married, and he said, I kind of like this homesteading thing, and I'm kind of intrigued about it, and I want to start planting my own garden. And I said, well, the most important thing that you can do is plant what you like to eat. Because if not, then it's all in waste. Then he said, well, I don't really like to eat fruits and vegetables. So let's plant what we like to eat, and we may have to change what we're thinking we like. So let's put ourselves on a little test. Us homesteaders, we think we're pretty self-sufficient, and we're doing pretty good. So let's put us on this little test. In the next 7 days, keep an eye on the food that we intake. How much of it came from our own homestead? And I'll give us a little more slack. How much of it came within 5 miles? How much of it came from within the community? I'll let you put the boundary on the community. How much of the food that we eat for the next 7 days did we raise, came from within 5 miles or within the community? That's a good test that we can put ourselves on. Where does our chicken come from? What about the milk that we consume? What about our eggs? Breakfast cereal, bananas, oranges. We think that we're going to be able to buy everything that we want to. In our lifetime, we've not experienced it. For a short bit in 2020, we saw some of that. And thankfully, that has brought a lot of people into thinking. We think differently than we did back then. I'm going to take it one step further. If we would put an order into the seed companies, an order comes and half of the seeds would say out of stock, what would we do? We rely on them. Back in 2020, Johnny's Seeds made the decision to not sell any more seeds to individual growers or to individual residential people, because they knew that the seed was a shortage at that point, and they knew the seed that they sold to the farmers was going to be more apt to put into the ground than the residential people, than the individuals. What can we bind together as a neighborhood, as a community, as an organization, or as just an ad hoc group? I've got some extra seeds over here, and share those. Those are some things that we can do. We live in an area with some of the most fertile farmland in the world. We have the opportunity to raise enough food to feed our families. We can raise peas, green beans, tomatoes. How many different food items can we make with tomatoes? Potatoes, sweet corn. Have we taken that first bite of sweet corn when it ripens in the summertime and we can kind of feel the juices going down over our cheek here? Yum, yum, yum. Strawberries. I continue to be amazed. Just yesterday I was over at Berlin Seeds. You can buy a pack of strawberries for $20. 25 plants of strawberries for $20. Put those plants into the ground, 25 of them. Next year, you're going to have about 50 to 75 quarts of strawberries. I also know that at our neighborhood farm stand that they were selling quarts of strawberries for $7 a quart. So let's do the math. If we do 60 quarts of strawberries at $7 a piece, how much are we paying? Too much? $420. Those same strawberries we can raise for $20. Any investors out here? We'd like to put our money in where we can get 21 times in a year. $20, we can put 25 plants of strawberries. We can yield about $420 worth of food. There's many other stories like that. We can cultivate our backyards. We raise most of our garden vegetables, fruits on less than an acre. It does not take a lot of ground. When we incorporate animals, it takes a little more acreage, which takes me to the second point, incorporating animals in chores. Animals seem to have a way of teaching us responsibilities. When our tool bags and saws, they won't be pawing the ground and bawling if we don't show up tomorrow morning. Ohio Prison Industries, they're an organization that runs alongside our correctional institutions here in Ohio, and they give low-risk inmates the opportunity to come out during the day and have a job. They used to have a farm. They've shut it down now, but outside of Marysville, they used to have a farm, and one morning, an inmate showed up on this farm, and he told the manager, I don't have any plans of working. They told me I'm supposed to come out here, so here I am, but I'm not going to work. So the manager said, okay. And he said, okay, well, I'll show you a little bit. And he says, over here, here's a pen of calves. This is how you bed them, and this is how you feed them, and you want to water them every day, and this is what you do. Okay. So about 2 weeks later, this inmate comes to his farm manager, and he says, you know what? He said, next week, I have a court date, and I can't be here on Tuesday. Can you make sure somebody takes care of my calves over here? See what happens? If we give our children animals and chores, we teach them responsibility. Let your children choose an animal. It's theirs, their own. We did that a number of years ago. We let our children choose animals, and our youngest daughter, Leanne, chose a pig. So I had a friend of mine that had Coonies, and I kind of had an intriguing about Coonies, and I called him up, and he says, yeah, he's got one that's pregnant. She'll have little ones here in about a month from now, and so we kind of made a deal, and about a week later, he shows up in his farm truck, and we backs up to the barn, and he unloads her, and he says, he likes if you scratch her behind the ears, and how to take care of it, and so on. And he said, by the way, her name's Lovely. You can name her whatever you want to. So about a month later, Leanne keeps checking on her pigs and her pig here, and she's watching her. And we know it's really close to her freshening. And one morning she comes tearing into the house, and she slides open the house door, and she said, "My pig had piglets." And we got to all go out there with our coats. It was pitter-pattering down rain, and we got to huddle into that little A-frame pig hut. And here the pig was lying with the 12 piglets side by side, and he's going and doing her thing. And we were just enjoying the moment. And those are some of the things, us adults, we have these goals and deadlines and things that we need to do, and checklists. But let's just stop sometimes and enjoy the moment. Enjoy the moment. The journey is the destination. We don't always have to be there. So they have a way of teaching us responsibilities. We loaned them money, and they had to pay for the feed. If we as dads pay for our children's feed, and that's the only way, our children's animals' feed, and that's the only way they can make money, we're giving them a warped sense of reality. So Kenneth, our son, had rabbits. When he found out that he could sell the Holland Lop rabbits for $8 and the Dutch belt rabbits for $3, and he has to pay his own feed, he decided very soon that he's raising lops. It didn't take him long to figure that out. Find ways to include your children. A couple weeks ago, we had 500 chicks dumped on our doorstep by the hatchery. There was a misunderstanding, and they accidentally shipped us 500. And we weren't sure what we were going to do with them. The brooders were empty, so we put them in the brooder. And finally, I called them, and we had a conversation about what's all going on here. And I looked at our girls, and I said, if you sell these, you can have half the profit. In 3 days flat, they had them all sold. So we can't do that all the time, but give them the opportunity to get involved. Give them the opportunity to get involved.